Welcome back. After the break, you're watching Indus News, and I'm Fiza Jamal with our main stories in detail. We start with U.S. President Donald Trump, who says he has asked leaders of India and Pakistan in a tough situation to work towards reducing tensions in Kashmir. President Trump said he also talked about trade and strategic partnership with Prime Minister Imran Khan and Premier Narendra Modi. Earlier, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Khan reiterated Pakistan's viewpoint on recent Indian actions in the occupied valley. He said a humanitarian crisis is in the making in occupied Kashmir. The foreign minister said Islamabad wants to de-escalate tensions and expects the U.S. to play its role in resolving the Kashmir dispute. India's lockdown of occupied Kashmir has entered its third week. More than 4,000 Kashmiris have been detained since India revoked Kashmir's special status on August the 5th. This report has the details.
The disputed Himalayan state of Kashmir has been turned into an open-air prison by Indian occupation forces for the last few weeks. A blanket curfew has brought life to a shuddering halt. Residents say they are fed up with the restrictions.
There is every kind of problem. Nobody can come or go anywhere. Everything is shut. There's a curfew. They are saying it is Section 144 to counter unlawful assembly, which is a lie. It is not true at all.
Indian occupation forces have employed brutal means to stop Kashmiris from demanding their right to self-determination, but they remain undeterred, and India's only response has been to maintain an indefinite curfew.
Ankara has warned Damascus not to play with fire a day after a Turkish military convoy came under attack in northwest Syria. Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu says Turkey will not move its observation post in Idlib province and will ensure its soldiers' security. The Turkish Defense Ministry said the convoy had been sent to keep the supply routes open and to ensure safety of the observation post. Meanwhile, Russia says it has deployed soldiers in the embattled region. Syrian government forces stepped up military operations in the area 4 months ago, killing hundreds and displacing a large number of people. In Syria, rebel forces have withdrawn from the key town of Khan Sheikhoun and parts of northern Hama province after heavy fighting with Syrian troops. Earlier, war monitors said the government forces seized northern and eastern parts of Khan Sheikhoun. Rebels say they have redeployed their fighters in the southern part of Khan Sheikhoun. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group said its fighters still control towns in areas adjoining Hama province. Meanwhile, Turkish military convoy has gathered in rural area of southern Idlib. This comes after a Russian airstrike hit a Turkish military convoy traveling towards the front lines in embattled Idlib province. Turkey said 3 civilians were killed and 12 others wounded in the attack. Turkish Defense Ministry said the attack violated Ankara's agreements with Moscow. Moreover, Russian President Vladimir Putin and French President Emmanuel Macron discussed current situation in Syria in a meeting. Macron expressed concern on bombing by regime forces in northwestern Idlib province, but Putin put his weight behind the Syrian government and said Moscow supports the attacks in Idlib. For more on this, we are joined by Michael Arnold from Istanbul. Michael Arnold, thank you for your time. So Syrian troops have forced out the rebels of Khan Sheikhoun town in Idlib when the Turkish forces were advancing towards the strategic town. Could there be any confrontation between forces of both the countries there?
So I think, tensions are obviously very high right now. As your report mentioned, Syrian regime troops have entered into the northern and eastern sections of the town. They've yet to actually control it, but most likely that will just be a matter of time. The situation remains very fluid at this point, and so of course there's a distinct possibility that there could be clashes between the Syrian regime and Turkish forces. But I think this is something that both sides would wish to avoid if at all possible. Neither one of them want to get dragged further into conflict with each other. But at this point, I think too a lot depends on what Turkey is going to do with its observation post. At this point, there's an Turkish observation post to the south of Khan Sheikhoun, and as we speak now, there's no yet publicly available information as to what its status is at this point.
And the US has called on the Syrian regime and its allies to immediately halt all hostilities in Idlib province after an airstrike on a Turkish convoy. Does Ankara have Washington's backing in launching operation over there?
Well, I think statements of condemnation from Washington at this point are not particularly valuable, although they may prove to be a moral support for Turkey in some ways. The reality is, though, in this region, the U.S. has very little say and has no ability to act. Russia is the main player in the area. Russia controls the airspace, and so even if Turkey had Washington's backing for some kind of operation in the area, I don't think that would have a particular effect on the situation on the ground.
Right, and Mr. Arnold, despite French President Macron's concern on bombing by regime forces in Idlib, Putin did put his weight behind the Syrian government, saying Moscow supports these attacks. Does this minimize chances of a ceasefire in near future?
So I think there's a number of things to point out here. So one, in theory, the Sochi agreement, which of course is part of the Astana process, is still in theory in play. But of course, as we're watching events unfold, that seems to be collapsing day by day. At the same time, if we're looking at the larger strategic issue in the region, Russia at this point can't afford, nor do they want to alienate and torpedo their relations with Turkey. This is something that they have put a lot of effort to in recent years to try to boost their relations with Turkey. And so while they will continue to support the Syrian regime, most analysts say at this point that those objectives will be limited in order to not alienate Turkey completely.
Right, thank you for your time, Michael Arnold. That was Michael Arnold joining us from Istanbul. Moving on, the U.S. has warned Greece and all Mediterranean ports against helping the Iranian tanker Grace 1 after its release by Gibraltar. In a rebuke to Britain, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called the vessel's release unfortunate. The tanker was detained in Gibraltar last month for carrying Iranian oil to Syria in violation of European Union sanctions. The U.S. wanted the Iranian tanker to be seized, but Gibraltar's government said EU law does not allow it to. Pompeo claimed Iran could use profits from the sale of the tanker's oil cargo to fund terrorist activities.
They're elite forces that have sown terror and destruction and killed Americans all around the world. And now they'll have, if they're successful, we hope that they're ultimately not, but if they're successful, they'll have more money, more wealth, more resources to continue their terror campaign, to continue their assassination campaign in Europe. This is what we're trying to stop. So it's
And earlier, President Donald Trump claimed Iran wanted to talk to Washington after the vessel's release, but Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Tehran is not interested in talking to the U.S. about a new nuclear deal. And now, Sudan separatists have seized 2 Yemeni government military bases near the port city of Aden. The separatists took over the bases in Zinjibar town a week after parting ways with the government. Earlier, the Saudi-led coalition launched 6 airstrikes on the rebel targets in the capital, Sana'a. The air campaign follows Houthi drone attacks on the southern Saudi city of Abha over the weekend. Meanwhile, the UN says 40 people have been killed and over 200 wounded in fighting since August the 8th. Germany and Jordan have agreed on the need for a 2-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This comes after German Defense Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer and Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi met in Amman. Safadi has welcomed Germany's support for the solution. He also thanked Germany for supporting Palestinian refugees through the United Nations Relief and Works Agency.
In our discussions today, we addressed the Palestinian issue, and I briefed Her Excellency on the challenges we're facing in relations to Jerusalem, and we do value the German firm position in the support of the 2-state solution as the only viable way going forward. We're grateful for the commitment that Germany continues to show towards UNRWA and supporting 5 million Palestinian refugees.
And now we'll take a very short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. After the break, we'll continue with our main stories now. Sudan's military says unveiling of a sovereign council has been postponed. A power-sharing agreement was signed between opposition and military last week, paving way for a transitional government and the elections. The military said the council's announcement was delayed at the request of the opposition as it wanted to review some of the names proposed earlier. The ruling Sovereign Council will have 11 members, including 6 civilians and 5 from the military. The opposition coalition has to choose 5 civilian members. The agreement designates the Sovereign Council as the highest authority in the country. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asked the European Union to scrap the Irish border backstop provision of the Brexit agreement. In a letter to European Council President Donald Tusk, British Prime Minister called the plan undemocratic. He claimed Britain's Parliament would approve the Brexit deal if the backstop plan is removed. The Prime Minister proposed using the post-Brexit transition period to find alternative ways of keeping the border open. Responding to the letter, Tusk says it includes no realistic alternatives to the Irish backstop. He says those against the backstop in fact support re-establishing a border even if they do not admit it. Earlier, Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar said the backstop provision cannot be changed. Moving on, over 9,000 people have been evacuated as wildfires rip through Spanish island of Gran Canaria. The fire has entered the northwestern Tamadaba National Park, home to island's oldest pine forests. Officials said the fires are advancing on 2 fronts in a mountainous area of the island. 16 helicopters and more than 8,000 firefighters are battling the 50-meter-high flames. Authorities said the efforts to tackle the fires were hampered by high temperatures and strong winds. Around 6,000 hectares have been burned till now, while several roads have been closed. A rescue ship with 107 migrants aboard has declined to leave Italian waters. Commander of the Open Arms says refugees stranded off Italy should be flown to Spain by Coast Guard. The charity ship dismissed Spanish offer to disembark at a port 1,000 kilometers away. Open Arms said the migrants on board were in dire condition to make another journey. The rescue group's decision pushed the standoff with Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. Salvini barred the migrants from disembarking, relenting only for 27 miners to get ashore. Earlier, several migrants jumped into the sea in a thwarted bid to reach shore in Italy. Immigrants held in U.S. detention facilities have filed a lawsuit decrying shoddy conditions and medical care. The suit, filed on behalf of 15 migrants and non-profits, seeks to represent detainees across the country. Immigrants said they're placed in isolation as punishment and denied recommended treatment and surgery. Some 55,000 immigrants are in the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Department's custody. ICE, which largely contracts with private companies and law enforcement agencies for detention space, has declined to comment. The suit cites problems at 8 facilities, including a privately run center in Adelanto, California, and Teller County Jail in Colorado. In a schoolyard in rural northeastern Syria, boys and girls break out into giggles watching Charlie Chaplin's pranks. This is a rare treat in the war-torn region, thanks to a mobile cinema roving through the countryside. Details here.
In Kurdish-held areas of Syria's northeast, filmmaker Sheru Hinde is screening films in remote villages. With just a laptop, projector and a canvas screen, he wants to spread the love of cinema in children.
The goal of this itinerant screening in the villages is for art to reach the children of the villages and the cities that do not have access.
His mobile cinema aims to introduce them to the magic of the silver screen from the early days of the moving pictures, which is something he missed out as a schoolboy.
We want them to discover international cinema since its beginning and to develop knowledge of cinema in their consciousness. And at the same time, we are showing American or French animation films that have been dubbed in Kurdish in our studio.
All cinemas once showed American B-movies and Bollywood fare, but they lost their audiences and closed. In local mines, cinema is also tied to tragedy after a fire ripped through a theater in 1960, killing more than 280 children. The elders now wish to give today's children a different experience.
I'm thrilled that cinema is coming to our region. I want my children to discover the atmosphere of cinema, to know what it is, to know films, and for them to reach their imagination, learn about the history of cinema.
Even some of the village's elders turned up to see the cartoon adventure, not having been to cinema in decades. Beyond their roving cinema, Hinde and his team dream of opening a movie theater at a fixed location. They acknowledge that it will depend on the end of war and return of stability to the country.
5 Kurdistan Workers' Party's militants have been killed by Turkish airstrikes during an anti-terror operation in northern Iraq. Turkey's National Defense Ministry says the air raids destroyed a weapons cache and shelters used by the PKK. The ministry said airstrikes were carried out in Metina region in coordination with the ongoing Operation Claw. A total of 85 Kurd militants have been killed since the launch of counter-terrorism offensive. Ankara accuses the PKK for the deaths of some 40,000 people, including women and children. Governments around the world are grappling with how to tackle the plague of single-use plastics. Many countries have banned the use of plastics altogether and shifted to environmentally friendly materials. But for the poor in Indonesia, trash is equal to cash. More in this report.
Tons of plastic debris are discarded every year, polluting land, rivers, and oceans. Bangun is among several poor communities in Java, on Indonesia's most populous island, that carve a living from mining waste. Around 2/3 of the town's residents collect and sell discarded plastic bottles, wrappers, and cups to local companies.
To locals here, rubbish is like treasure. Treasure, why? Because after we dry it up in the morning and sort it out, it will be converted into money in the evening.
After China blocked imports of foreign garbage earlier this year, the pile of plastic waste in Indonesia has mounted. Environmental NGO Greenpeace has warned that short-term prosperity from plastic mining comes at a high cost to the environment and public health. Indonesian authorities have stepped up the monitoring of imported waste to prevent the country from becoming a dumping ground for foreign trash.
We hope the government will make improvements around here, but we don't want it to close down this rubbish business. Local people have a saying that if it's closed down, we will fight it until our last drop of blood.
Elsewhere in Indonesia, authorities are fighting back against non-biodegradable garbage. Holiday hotspot Bali is rolling out a single-use plastics ban, while the populous city of Surabaya offers free travel to bus passengers in exchange for recyclable plastics.
The Russian city of Kaliningrad is marking the 100-year anniversary of the first passenger flight over Europe. An air show featuring about 50 light airplanes from all over the EU was staged in the Baltic Sea. For details, watch this report.
The first European passenger flight landed on Davao Airfield in 1919, opening the civil airway from Berlin to Kaliningrad. This year marks the 100th anniversary of that flight. Pilots and airplane owners from Germany, Sweden, Poland, and Switzerland gathered at Davao to show off their skills and exchange stories.
Yeah, it's a special smell. And also this Muni, it's very famous for this tank because this is not a special tank inside the ring. The ring is the tank itself. So this sheet of metal is just around the surrounding for the tank.
For some pilots, the trips from their home cities were lengthy. Detlef Kellinghusen, who worked as a pilot at Lufthansa for 40 years, flew for 5.5 hours with a tailwind from his home in Aschenberg.
It's a very slow airplane, yes, but I think the travel is the target, yeah. You have to travel, and that is the target. I don't want to have speed. When I need speed, I take an airliner.
Some aviators performed stunts in the air and allowed the public to take photos beside and even inside their aircraft.
Now let's take you to the world of business, where Chinese telecommunications giant Huawei has called a U.S. move to blacklist 46 more of its overseas affiliates unjust and politically motivated. It said attempts to suppress Huawei's business will not help the U.S. achieve technological leadership. Huawei called on the U.S. government to end its unjust treatment and remove the Chinese firm from its economic blacklist. It dismissed Washington's decisions to delay a ban on U.S. firms selling to Huawei by 3 months. Huawei said the U.S. decisions would not have a substantial impact on its business. As the weather seems to be getting a little better in Lahore, let's see what the weather is looking like around the globe. Well, these are all the main stories in detail I have for you this hour. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.